Welcome to the Recipients of Honor YouTube channel. This channel is dedicated to telling the stories of Medal of Honor recipients. For conspicuous devotion to duty, extraordinary courage, and complete disregard of his own life above and beyond the call of duty during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor by Japanese forces on 7 December 1941. As commanding officer of the U.S.S. West Virginia, after being mortally wounded, Captain Bennion evidenced apparent concern only in fighting and saving his ship, and strongly protested against being carried from the bridge. Marvin Sharp Bennion was born on May 5, 1887 in Vernon, located in the Toole County of the Utah Territory. He was the second oldest child of 9 and first son of his parents, Israel and Jeanette. While doing the research on Marvin Sharp Bennion's life, I came across a biographical sketch which was completed by his brother, Howard Bennion. This biographical sketch contains many stories of Marvin as a child and what he was like up until his death. There are personal accounts, letters written from Marvin to the family, and many personal anecdotes that describe Marvin as being obedient, nice, and considerate. One of my favorite stories from the biographical sketch that displayed Marvin's courage was when he was younger and his uncles were putting away horses, and Marvin asked if he could ride them back into the stable. While riding, there was a tin can that Marvin had, and it started to rattle, which spooked the horse into a full sprint. He was able to hold on for a quarter mile before falling off, but sustained no injuries while the horse continued on. About a year later, those same uncles gifted Marvin a riding horse, and while riding, he urged the horse into a gallop. The horse picked up speed and eventually jumped into a ditch, but Marvin was able to jump off and again sustained no injuries. I like that story because it explains Marvin's courage, even from an early age. A few years later, still during Marvin's childhood, he and his brother were climbing a cliff. This cliff was high and had sloping rocks. Marvin led the way with his brother behind him. As they were climbing, Marvin noticed that there wasn't a clear path to climb up anymore, and he had asked his younger brother to climb back down the same way they were going. His brother had done his best effort to not look down or back the way they came, and when initially finding his bearings, became overwhelmed at the height and the distance they had climbed. His younger brother began to feel dizzy and began to cry. Without hesitation though, Marvin comforted his brother and at his own risk maneuvered around him to get below and help his brother back down, giving reassurance and having the patience with his younger brother the entire time. I like that story because it explains his fearlessness and his devotion that Marvin always exhibited. He was described as always lending a helping hand, no matter the task, and he always made sure to see it through. He was no stranger to hard work or responsibility. This development of Marvin's character was no accident, as his parents meticulously ensured each of their children were taught to work, the importance of respect, faith, and regard for others. Through grammar school, Marvin worked on various farmlands that his family owned and even taught homeschool lessons to his siblings during the winter months. When he was 14, he attended the Latter-day Saints High School in Salt Lake City. He attended high school for 2 years and took a year off due to a lack of funds. But in that year, Marvin didn't take any time off. He continued teaching lessons to his siblings, and he worked jobs wherever he could find them. Eventually, he made it back to Latter-day Saints High School and graduated in May of 1906. He received excellent marks in all his classes, something that would carry over into his military career. He attributed all his success in school to his loving family, who provided the housing, affection, and numerous supports. All the contributions from his family were greatly appreciated, and it played a very vital role in his development. Through his childhood, Marvin had always been interested in West Point and had done as much research as possible. Towards the end of his high school graduation though, Marvin had taken the entrance examination for the Naval Academy. It was June in 1906 that he made the journey to Annapolis. Aboard U.S.S. Severn, sailing down Chesapeake Bay, he learned all necessary nautical practices. To no surprise, Mervyn was quickly labeled as hardworking and outstanding as a student. He won the Navy letter N for the 2-mile run on the track team, and he was first in his class for a majority of his academic career, and he became a sought-out tutor by other students during the difficult lessons. In addition, he published both for the LDS Church and the Academy, all while still receiving perfect marks. He was widely regarded as personable and a joy to be around, and many students later gave accounts of Mervyn's sense of humor, level-headedness, and his ability to connect with others. He graduated from the Naval Academy in June of 1910 and received a sword from the Daughters of the American Revolution for excellence in seamanship and law. After the Naval Academy, Mervyn's first assignment was aboard U.S.S. California, the flagship of the Pacific Fleet at the time. The ship was about to embark on a cruise to Chile. Mervyn was appointed as an aide for the fleet navigator. He later wrote in a letter home that during the cruise he had gained experience in various roles such as target practice, standing watch, and in drill. About a year later, U.S.S. California was preparing for the voyage to the Philippines, China, and Japan. On December 7, 1911, 30 years before his fateful death during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, he wrote a letter home that said, quote, "Last week we took a cruise around the island of Oahu. General Murray and several other Army officers were aboard and spent the time studying the coastline with a view to finding out the best way of fortifying it. There was a pilot aboard, and he pointed out to me the Laie settlement on the north coast of the island. It was a beautiful sight. I'm sending a check for tithing. It's time to close my accounts for the year. I should probably have no chance to write home again in time to reach you before Christmas, so I want to send my good wishes and also a small remembrance. MSB." Unquote. Following that cruise, Mervyn had a brief return to San Diego before a 3-year assignment on the west coast of Central America. Aboard the small gunboat U.S.S. St. Louis, Mervyn sailed up and down the coast of Mexico, protecting American interests, evacuating refugees, and being a point of communication to Mexican officials. After his deployment, Mervyn spent a year as a postgraduate at the Naval Academy, specializing in naval ordnance. 1917 saw the outbreak of war, and aboard the U.S.S. North Dakota, Mervyn was a lieutenant in charge of a gun turret. The turret operators were a well-tuned and efficient crew. Each man played a vital role, but it was because of Mervyn's leadership that the team worked so well together. December of 1917, Mervyn was detached from U.S.S. North Dakota and made his way to Washington. The Chief of Bureau of Ordnance had urgently asked for him and gave him the task of making informational pamphlets on new gun sighting devices. He was only in Washington for about a month when the captain of U.S.S. North Dakota sent a letter to the Bureau asking for Mervyn to return. The Chief of Bureau had responded that Mervyn could not be spared and was needed for his knowledge. This is a testament to the hard-working and knowledgeable nature of Mervyn. That following spring, Mervyn was sent to New York to oversee the outfitting of USS New Mexico before her commissioning. Once the armistice was signed, the Chief of Bureau of Ordnance once again asked for Commander Bennion's service to settle war contracts, serve on boards, and visit gun factories. This assignment ended Mervyn's junior officer duties, and he assumed more responsibilities as a result. It was during this assignment that he met and married Louise Clark, with their wedding on February 5, 1920. They had a quaint reception in the home of their parents and lived there for a brief moment. Let's go over his final 20 years of naval service. After the wedding, Mervyn and Louise moved to Newport News, where Mervyn helped oversee the outfitting of USS Maryland. He then served as the Assistant Fire Control Officer once the ship was commissioned. In 1923, he switched roles and became the gunnery officer for USS Florida, and that summer participated in a cruise with midshipmen from the Naval Academy. While on the cruise, they journeyed to Europe and even met the Danish and British royal families. Between the years of 1924 and 1926, Mervyn served as gunnery officer aboard USS Tennessee in Dahlgren, Virginia. In April of 1925, Mervyn Louise's son, Mervyn Jr., was born. Towards the end of this assignment, Mervyn's commanding officer, G.L.C. Stone, recommended Mervyn for a commanding officer position because of his, quote, excellent service in all respects, unquote. He served as the navigator aboard U.S.S. Maryland for a year, and during that assignment, the ship won the Battle Efficiency Award. Bennion had contributed to much of that success. July 1929 to July 1932, Marvin once again served in the Bureau of Ordnance in Washington. Unsurprisingly, his colleagues couldn't speak highly enough of his service and his work ethic. Next was another stint of sea duty from 1932 to 1934. Bennion was the commander of the destroyer U.S.S. Bernadou for a few months. He was the commander of U.S.S. Biddle for a few months before his appointment as commander of Destroyer Division 1 with U.S.S. Hartfield as the flagship. At that assignment, his service was once again impeccable. This even resulted in the mayor of Anacortes, Washington, to write a formal letter to the Secretary of the Navy about Bennion's service. This assignment was particularly enjoyed by Marvin, and because of this, he excelled. Commander of the U.S. Fleet, Admiral David Sellers, wrote this about Marvin. Quote, his career in the naval service was characterized by uniform excellence in carrying out any task to which he was assigned. It was not alone through the high standards set by him in the performance of his naval duties that he commanded the respect of and endeared himself to his brother officers. His quiet manner and many fine traits of character engendered a high regard and affection amongst all those with whom he has thrown in contact. Unquote. Marvin then attended and instructed at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island between 1934 and 1936. After, he served as the executive officer aboard U.S.S. Arizona for 1 year. His reputation continually improved as he led by example, giving the majority of his time to the ship and crew. Next, Marvin commanded U.S.S. Nitro, which was an ammunition supply ship that operated between naval bases on the East Coast and naval bases on the West Coast. He wasn't there for long before the ship was awarded the Red Battle E and was recognized by the Secretary of the Navy, specifically citing Marvin for his service. After a little under 2 years, Marvin was once again called back to Washington to work at the Bureau of Ordnance. The position he had this time was in the financial sector. He was required to work closely with Congress and to represent the Navy in a period of great expansion. He served in this position from 1939 to 1941, and each yearly review that Marvin had was noted as excellent, efficient, or hard-working. July 2nd of 1941, Marvin was relieved of this position and enjoyed a month-long vacation before what would soon be his last naval assignment. August 12th, Marvin assumed command of U.S.S. West Virginia. Rear Admiral W.S. Anderson, the commander of the battle fleet, had made only one fit rep on Marvin. It read, September 30th, 1941, quote, Captain Bennion, in the short time in command of the flagship, has created an entirely and unusually favorable impression. He has taken hold promptly and definitely, with excellent results already apparent. Character excellent. Particularly desire to have him. Promotion recommended. Unquote. Marvin Bennion had made a stellar reputation for himself. His name carried with it excellence, kindness, devotion to crew, and was hardworking. Many of the sailors aboard U.S.S. West Virginia had either already been under his command or had heard stories of his abilities. He was a leader who was able to bring out the best in those who he was leading. Through his own calmness, discipline, and kindness, the crew were dedicated to giving their best. And in return, Marvin was not only well respected, but even loved. The morning of December 7th, 1941, was starting out as normal for Marvin Bennion. It was just before 0800, and he was shaving in preparation for Sunday school. The calmness of the morning was abruptly ended when a sailor burst in to notify him of an incoming Japanese attack. Mervyn immediately acted and gave the command to man battle stations. There are a few discrepancies I came across during my research in the exact events of Mervyn's last few hours of life, which is to be expected in such a traumatic event. Memory and perspectives may be skewed. Out of respect for Mervyn's memory and his family, I will only describe the events that were unanimous amongst all the research available. After giving the command to man battle stations, he made his way to the conning tower on the flag bridge. Once there, he ensured the preparedness of the crew and gave the call for ammunition to be brought up from the hold. Within a minute, the U.S.S. West Virginia was hit with 3 torpedoes. There were bombs exploding all around, airplanes flying so low they seemingly scraped the mast. The torpedoes tore a great hole in the ship, and through the chaos, Mervyn remained steady. He gave the command to flood the unaffected part of the ship, which stopped the ship from listing. He was doing everything possible to make sure the Japanese attack would not result in the complete loss of U.S.S. West Virginia. Mervyn was determined to get the overall damage report of the ship and made a dash to the flag bridge. It was there that Mervyn had been hit with a piece of shrapnel from the bombs and torpedoes that were exploding all around him. The shrapnel tore through his abdomen, hitting his spine, knocking him down. When he regained his consciousness, the only concern he had was the ship's status and how the crew was performing. It is said that despite his fatal wound, he refused to give in to the pain, and until his last breath, and while holding his open wound with one hand, gave commands and remained committed to his duties. In his last minutes, Mervyn was moved by his fellow shipmates from the compartment that was filling up with the smoke. He fought the intense pain for as long as he could, but ultimately died from the loss of blood. Captain Mervyn Bennion was one of 106 sailors from the U.S.S. West Virginia that died from the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. A few days later, on December 15th, the Secretary of the Navy said in an official statement, quote, "The dying captain of a battleship displayed the outstanding individual heroism of the day." As he emerged from the conning tower to the bridge, the better to fight his ship, his stomach was laid completely open by a shrapnel burst. He fell to the deck, refusing to be carried to safety, and he continued to fight his ship, unquote. Mervyn's commander, Admiral Anderson, wrote in a letter to Mervyn's wife, quote, "He was an able officer and fine gentleman, respected by all, a good example to all his juniors. In his tragic but glorious death, mortally wounded in action on the bridge of his ship, he excelled himself. Felled and dying, he would not permit his removal, but continued at his post to the end, concerned only with fighting and saving his ship. And I should like to seize this occasion to express my admiration of Captain Bennion's devoted and heroic conduct at the attack on Pearl Harbor, where he made the supreme sacrifice," unquote. Mervyn's executive officer also wrote in a letter to Mervyn's wife, quote, "Be assured, Miss Bennion, that every person in the West Virginia shares your grief. We are all proud to have served under Captain Bennion, and his kindness, cheerfulness, and courage will always be remembered by all of us who have had the privilege and pleasure of being under his command. Many others, stirred by his brave conduct, paid like tribute," unquote. Mervyn's body would later be removed and is currently buried in City Cemetery in Salt Lake City, Utah. Because of his devotion to crew and excellent leadership, Captain Mervyn Bennion was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. In addition, and in his honor, a training camp at the Naval Training Center in Faru, Idaho, was named Camp Bennion. On July 4th of 1943, U.S.S. Bennion was launched and christened by Louis Bennion. Mervyn's son had just joined the Navy at the time and was unfortunately not present for the launch. That ship was in service from December 15th, 1943 to June 20th, 1946. In its 3 years of service, the ship was awarded 10 battle stars and the Presidential Unit Citation. U.S.S. Bennion was involved in the Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and 3rd Fleet operations. It was eventually stripped and sold for parts in 1973. I highly recommend checking out the biographical sketch that exists on his life, as there is much more detail that goes into the exact events surrounding Marvin's life. Captain Marvin Sharp Bennion went above and beyond the call of duty in all aspects of his service. His valiant actions inspired others to give the best and to work as hard as they could. His service was just about flawless, and his devotion to duty is a great example of a naval career. Thanks for watching.